This is Rocky Flats, a vast prairie land upon which many brave men and women fought to preserve America's freedom. Here, school children are encouraged to frolic about, basking in the alpha rays of both the sun and plutonium waste. Your family will enjoy our cute and cuddly local wildlife, seen here within the beautiful Rocky Flats Wildlife Refuge. Tired of the same old boring human babies? Are you a fan of the X-Men? Well, if we
already went over this in class. No one cares about this. Why are we talking about it?
Well, that's the whole reason we were going to do this. It's a satirical commentary on society as we know it.
Okay, no, we've already talked about this. Some people have even specifically said that they weren't going to do anything.
Well, we'll make them care. That's the point.
Zane, why the hell are you doing that stupid British accent?
What?
And now for something completely different.
Rocky Flats is a major issue for Colorado and people of the previous century. Its effects are still being felt today, and the radioactivity is a huge problem. But we're not in the area. We're not those people, and it doesn't really affect us, at least not directly. So we're not going to talk about Rocky Flats. We're going to talk about something completely different. We're going to talk about GMOs, genetically modified organisms. Now, not exactly Rocky Flats, a bit of a difference from nuclear proliferation and leaking radioactivity, but there's still quite a few similarities. With Rocky Flats, people didn't know what information to believe. There was lots of conflicting information, both scientific and from the government, about whether or not it was safe or beneficial. And the people who paid attention to that had to choose between those two sources of information. But many people didn't even know about it. And of the people who did, a lot of people simply didn't care. And that's the same with GMOs. There's lots of different information about them, whether or not they're good or bad for us. But a lot of people don't know or don't care. So that's why we're going to talk about these genetically modified organisms. Now, just to be clear, this is not to be confused with hybridization, which is what we've been doing for as long as mankind has existed, which is essentially breeding different crops to have the most desirable genetic traits. That's an entirely different thing. Genetically modified organisms are when you actually go and tamper with the genetic code of the organism. And this can be done to make the plants be larger, taste better, and resist pests and insects. But there's also a number of risks that may or may not come along with that process. Now, we're going to present you with all the information we have as best we can, both the good and the bad. What you do with that is up to you. But know this, it does affect you. It's what you eat. There's no getting around it. One way or another, you will have to deal with GMOs. The question is, what are you going to do about it?
All GMO products are tested and researched. GMOs cannot create allergens because of our understanding of the way genes are read in a protein.
According to the Union of Concerned Scientists, genetically engineered crops may produce new allergens and toxins. But this is patently false. We add new structure and function to genes. We know how genes work. We have to know what a gene does before we can use it. So unless there is malicious intent, we would not be putting in toxins or allergens. According to the FAO, there are no allergic effects for genetically modified foods on the market. There is a risk to new technologies. However, risk aversion alone isn't a reason to reject this new science.
Recently, many people have taken up arms against GMOs, fearing that by genetically modifying the very plants that we consume, we could be creating unanticipated problems along with them. One of these arguments states that by genetically modifying one plant with the genes of another, we could transfer or even create new allergenic stimuli in the resulting foods. According to ResponsibleTechnology.org, this was demonstrated in the mid-1990s when soybeans were outfitted with a gene from the Brazil nut. While scientists had attempted to produce a healthier soybean, they ended up with a potentially deadly one. Blood tests from people who were allergic to Brazil nuts showed reactions to the genetically modified soybeans, which suggests that they are reacting to the Brazil nut gene that was inserted into the soybeans. This danger is multiplied by the inaccuracy of the current tests we use to detect possible allergic reactions. These tests do not always take into account the fact that most allergic reactions don't show themselves until a person has eaten the food several times. According to former FDA microbiologist Louis Pribble, the only definitive test for allergies is human consumption by affected peoples, which can have ethical considerations. The final and most alarming health risk is due to the increased survivability of the GMO'd produce. Much of our genetically modified foods have been designed to produce their own insecticides. This reduces the need for farmers to spray their plants and thus saves the farmers money. But because this produce is creating its own modified poison, it opens the possibility of something called horizontal gene transfer. Horizontal gene transfer is when a gene from one organism spontaneously transfers to another organism. This usually occurs between bacteria and is fairly rare between plants and animals. But due to the process involved in genetic engineering, many of the natural barriers that prevent this from happening in animals are reduced. This poses the danger of transferring the GMO's poison gene to the consumer and could pose serious threat to their health. These health risks are very real dangers that could impact anyone who eats GMO'd foods. And with GMOs on the rise, is this a risk you're willing to take?
One of the biggest benefits of GMOs is the increase in productivity. With our growing population, that's something we sorely need. The world population is currently over 7 billion and is expected to reach 9 billion by 2050. In order to feed that many people, we need the higher yield of GMOs. The USDA found that on average, GMOs currently are 1.7% more productive and conserve valuable farmland. Even if these numbers plateau, which is not likely, that's a massive difference on such a large scale. One way GMOs produce more is by incorporating a gene that produces a mild toxin that is used as an insecticide. Though there have been few long-term studies on GMOs, field tests have shown that the tested GMOs are harmless to everything but the pests they target.
So do you guys want me to do some sort of German
No.
accent?
Shut up!
I would be lying if I said that genetically modified foods was not efficient. But should we only be concentrating on the efficiency of our products? The American Academy of Environmental Medicine wrote a position report stating that the strength of association and consistency between GM foods and disease is confirmed in several animal studies. In one of these studies, they tested the reactions of GMO'd soy versus natural soy when fed to female rats. Within the first 3 weeks, the majority of the GMO-fed rats' babies died. Those that survive often experienced stunted growth or infertilization later in life. These effects are caused by the GMO plants producing their own insecticides. But this self-generated poison poses the threat that it won't just affect the target insects, but non-target organisms as well. On top of that is the impact the GMO'd crops could have on other plants. By creating genetically modified crops, we also run the risk of something called outcrossing. Outcrossing occurs when a domestic crop is unintentionally bred with a related plant. Normally, this would not pose much of a risk, but as scientists genetically modify our crops to be resistant to pesticides and insects, they run the risk of accidentally outcrossing the resistant genes to other plants. This could create new strains of weeds that would be resistant to pesticides and could overrun the very crops we are trying to protect. It is studies like this that has raised questions on the other unforeseen impacts that these plants could have on the environment.
Monsanto is spearheading the nation's movement into genetically modified produce. We cannot simply assume that they are acting out of the good in their hearts. According to gmeducation.org, more than 80% of U.S. corn and more than 90% of soybeans planted each year are attributable to Monsanto. This is a monopoly. Should Monsanto gain too much influence over the grain and GMO industry, they could begin to spike prices, or even worse, implement the Terminator seed. The Terminator seed is any genetically modified produce that is designed to be infertile and force farmers to buy new seeds annually. After a 2-year investigation, the Department of Justice announced that it has closed its investigation into possible anti-competitive practices in the seed industry. They did so without releasing any public statement by the U.S. Department of Justice Antitrust Division. Monsanto is revealing itself to be quite similar to the Rocky Flats nuclear plant, exhibiting the same sketchy politics and questionable ethics, along with the same amount of unanswered questions and a lack of people searching for the answers.
We cannot immediately criminalize Monsanto. They are the leading experts in researching GMOs.
Monsanto Company is an American multinational chemical and agricultural biotechnology corporation headquartered in Missouri. It is a leading producer of the genetically engineered seed and the Roundup brand. Monsanto was a pioneer in applying the biotechnology industry business model to agriculture, using techniques developed by Genentech and other biotech drug companies in the late 1970s in California. They have opened the door to many new benefits for various people. For example, farmer benefits increase productivity or reduce cost by increasing yield, improving protection from insects and disease, increasing their crops' tolerance to heat, drought, and other environmental stress. Processor benefits improve the quality and quantity of animal feed, food and energy sources. Consumer benefits are advantages such as increased protein, healthier oils, and a lot of environmental benefits include conserving the soil and energy and reducing greenhouse gases.
GMOs are inevitable. Like it or not, they're here to stay. They greatly affect the economy, farmers, and of course, you. We told you about the good and the bad. We have discussed the potential risks to the environment and to the people, and why they might not be risks after all. We've talked about corporate control over GMOs and the relationship to the growing population. But this is just scratching the surface. There's so much more about GMOs that we can't even begin to cover in the short span of this video. So now, it comes to you. Will you choose to educate yourself on this topic, learn more about this, and speak up, make your voice heard, and make a difference? Or will you just walk out the door and forget about this presentation, just like you did with the one book? Will you just walk out, remain willfully ignorant of what you eat, and not do anything? The choice is yours. As Kristen Iverson said, to speak out or remain silent is the first and most crucial decision we can make. What will you choose?
Lives are shattered. The nation is in chaos. Death and destruction sweeps the country. Foursquare Productions presents perhaps the funniest film ever made. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. You've never seen a film like it. This is the incredible story of the world's ultimate disaster. Vicious man-eating tomatoes grow to monstrous proportions. Faced with this unprecedented menace, the president calls upon Mason Dixon, special agent. Join Mason Dixon in a race against time as he battles to save the world from the threat of nature's perfect eating machine, the Killer Tomato. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. You've never seen anything like it.
Virginia!